the second book of the Torah, Shmos, begins with us being introduced to Moshe. Moshe, born, found in the little teva, the little basket, and Batya, Bas Paro, she finds him and begins to raise him. Moshe grows up, ends up killing an Egyptian who's striking a Jew, and has to flee Egypt. Where does he go? In the Torah, it looks like he runs off to Midian, where he meets his father-in-law, marries Tzipporah, but that happened after quite a number of years. He left Mitzrayim, he left Egypt, at about 20 years old. Gets to Midian at about 60 years old. There's 40 years that are missing. Where was he? Well, the Medrash gives us a story about where Moshe was for those 40 years. It seems that in Kush, which is Ethiopia, so when Moshe left Mitzrayim, instead of heading east, crossing into Eretz Canaan, going further east to Midian, instead of heading east, he went west. He went to Ethiopia, Kush. And when he got there, there was already a siege taking place. You see, here's the way the story goes. The king of Kush, Kinkos, had been out of the city on a campaign of war, and left in charge of the city a fellow named Bilam. Yes, the very same Bilam that we will meet later in the Torah. Bilam, being the type of a man he was, when he found himself alone in the city as the leader of the people of Kush, he gathered around him the wise men and said, you know what? We can take control of this city because the king is gone, and we can close the door of the city and fortify it, and we will become the rulers of Kush. And that's what they did. While Kinkos, the king of Kush, was on his campaign, Bilam had the west or east side, we don't know which side, a deep moat was dug, filled with water, and the moat was so big and so wide, and into that moat were put certain kinds of fish and sharks and piranhas and crocodiles and alligators. It was a very, very, very dangerous moat that was built on that side. On another side was dug a deep pit, very deep, very broad, very wide. And into that pit were put scorpions and snakes of all kinds, poisonous scorpions, poisonous snakes. On the other two sides, it was up against the side of a mountain, impossible to approach the city from those two sides. And so what we had now was a city that was fortified, and when Kinkos, the king, returns from his campaign victorious and was hoping to enter the city and show his wonders that he had brought back with him, he couldn't get in. They tried to cross the moat, and the alligators and the alligators and the crocodiles and the sharks and the piranhas, they began to tear the men to pieces. It was horrible. Blood was everywhere. So he said, you know what? Let's go on the other side. It's just a big pit. So the men went into that, and immediately the snakes and the scorpions started biting them, and men were dying left and right. It was horrible. Kinkos didn't know what to do. During this siege, during the first year, that's the year that Moshe Rabbeinu fled from Egypt, and he went to Kush, to Ethiopia. When he entered the place where the troops were, the men were amazed at this royal countenance that this man had on him. You're talking about Moshe at 20 years old, young, strong, strapping fellow with a regal appearance, having been raised in the palace of Paro. And they took a liking to him. And word got to the king that this man has just joined us. Very wise man, talks very well, got some good ideas about war. And the king met him and liked him so much he made him one of his main advisors. And Moshe stayed with the king, but it was a long, long siege. They couldn't figure out a way to get through to the castle, and King Kush set up a camp outside of the palace, and that's where he lived. They had enough food, they had enough water, and they were figuring one day they'll be able to get in. But in the meantime, they had a place to live, and years passed. After a number of years, about 9 years, King Kush, the king of Kush, passed away. And after a week of mourning, they turned to each other, the men of the camp, and said, "What shall we do now? The king's son is just a little baby, and the queen, she's not capable of running this country. We need a king." And someone said, "You know what? Let's turn to Moshe. He's got everything that we need to be a king." And that's exactly what they did. So Moshe, after being in the camp for about 8 years, became the king of Kush. But he's still outside the palace, outside the castle. "What shall we do?" the men said to Moshe. "What shall we do?" Moshe considered this now from a different position, not just as an advisor, but as the king. He had to do something, and immediately an idea crossed his mind. And he said to the men, "I have an idea, but you have to listen to me." Yes, what is it?" "You must promise. What I tell you to do, you will do it without questioning." Well, they began to question the wisdom of having chosen a king that would put such an order in front of them. They had to listen to him. But they remembered Moshe was really quite a good man. So they said, "Yes, we will obey what you tell us to do." And then Moshe says, "Here's what I want you to do. Spread out through the forests. Each man travels through the forest until he finds a baby stork." A baby stork, one of those birds that have long legs and a long nose, a long beak. Bring that baby stork back to the camp and train the stork that it shall do what you tell it to do. You train it. It's just a stork, after all. You can train animals. Learn to train this stork. And that's what they did. So each man went through the forest, and by the end of a few weeks, each man had his own baby stork. And they began to train the stork for months. They were training this stork, each man his stork. At the end of approximately 6 months, Moshe says, "Now, here's what I want you to do. Do not feed your stork tomorrow." "What? You want us to kill our storks? We've come to love our stork." "No. Do not feed the stork tomorrow." "All right." "And the next day? Do not feed your stork on the second day." 2 days? You want us to starve our storks?" "Yes." After 2 days, they came to him again. 3 days. On the third day, "Do not feed your stork." "We're going to kill our baby storks." "They're not babies anymore. They'll be able to handle this starvation for another day." And that's what they did. On the fourth day, Moshe says, "Now, release the storks over the pit with the snakes and the scorpions." Well, those storks were so hungry, they just dove into the pit. Each one grabbed a snake and sucked up a snake, and another one, then sucked up a scorpion, and then sucked up another snake. And before you knew it, the pit was empty of snakes. All the scorpions were gone. Empty. Moshe said to the men, "Charge!" And they charged over the pit, down into the pit, around the pit, up to the side of the pit, and into the palace. Bilam was shocked. He ran away from that city as quick as he could. And where did he go? He went to Mitzrayim, where he became an advisor to Paro. One wicked man joins another wicked man, and we will meet Bilam again later. Well, Moshe is now king of Kush inside the palace, and the wife of King Kush had become Moshe's wife. But Moshe never touched her. Years go by. She watches her son grow. But Moshe is such a good man, a wise man. The people loved him, and they didn't want to have anything to do to change their king. But the queen came to the men of Kush and said after 30 years, you know, Moshe might be a very wise, good man, but he's not very good as a husband. He hasn't touched me all these years. And my son has grown ready to be able to take over here. And they agreed. After all, royalty follows father to son, father to son. And Moshe really came out of Mitzrayim. He wasn't the son of King Kush. The son of King Kush was now a good 40-year-old strapping young man, taught by Moshe how to be a king, and Moshe agreed it was time for him to leave. He bid farewell to the people of Kush, and he headed east now. East, found his way to Midian. Moshe, now a man of about 60, approaches the village where his father-in-law to be, Yisro, lives with his daughters, and came to the well. And at the well, the story of Moshe continues, perhaps another time, but this is the story where Moshe marries Tzipporah, and the story continues there. We will continue Parsha Shmos another time. God bless.